Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Melissa Burke, and I'm going to be your host for today. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's webinar, which is on the topic of tools for data management planning. And I'm very pleased to introduce our two speakers, Sarah Jones from the Digital Curation Centre and Rob Hooft from DTL in the Netherlands. So Sarah is the Associate Director of the Digital Curation Centre at the University of Glasgow, where she coordinates work on the DCC's data management planning tool, DMPonline, and undertakes research on data policy and data management planning. Sarah provides advisory services, training and consultancy via the DCC, building on many lessons learned during the DCC's institutional engagement program. Here, she led support for several universities, helping them to scope researchers' requirements, develop data strategies, deliver training, customize DMPonline, and implement research data management services. Sarah is involved in several European Commission-funded projects in which she focuses primarily on training, data management planning, and network building to facilitate open science. Rob was educated as a structural chemist at Utrecht University and has a PhD on the subject of structure-activity relationships of sweet-tasting compounds. He spent 4 years in EMBL Heidelberg, where he developed tools to verify the quality of protein. He later worked in industry for Linnaeus and Bruker ASX. Rob has since moved back into the academic world and joined the Netherlands Centre for Bioinformatics, NBIC, as CTO for the Service-Directed Program. Via a 2-year excursion into the Netherlands eScience Centre, from where he ran the data program of the Dutch Tech Centre for Life Sciences, he's now working for DTL itself, managing the Dutch task in the European ELIXIR infrastructure for life science data. As part of these roles, Rob has been building up a body of knowledge of fair research data stewardship since early 2014. With that, I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to get us started in today's webinar.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Melissa. So I'm just going to minimize this screen so I can see my slides too. So what Rob and I are going to speak about is different tools for data management planning. So I think you may already be familiar with the concept of data management plans, but I'll give you a quick introduction to that, what we do at the DCC through DMPonline and DMP Roadmap, which is the underlying code base we use for our tool. So a data management plan is a kind of brief plan that's often written at the start of a research project about what data you're going to create, how that's going to be managed and shared throughout the research. And while a number of researchers may come across DMPs because of funder requirements, I think ultimately the plan is of benefit to you because it's helping you make informed decisions about which data you're going to create, what formats to use to make sure that's reusable by others and that it can be preserved long term. And it allows you to try and avoid some of the problems you might run into during the course of research. So issues with data loss or security breaches, because you can think about how you're going to transfer your data across the different partners and share it so that everyone has access when they need to. We found that the DMP can also be a good talking point to allow you to develop procedures early on for how you're going to collect your data, how you're going to make sure that it's accurate and reliable. So ultimately, I think the process of developing a plan is a good way to start conversations in your project and to make your research life easier. And it's really important that the plan evolves as you're going on, because things will change as you begin to conduct your research, and your decisions about which data to collect or which data can be shared will alter. So DMPonline is an online tool to try and help you develop your data management plan. And what we do, we try and tailor what you're presented with to your particular context. So as I mentioned, there may be various requirements from different organizations, either from funders or from institutions, about what should be covered in your data management plan. So we bring that together with guidance and support from various different groups, and that may come from your research funder or the institute in which you're based, or it could be from your research discipline or from other sources like the DCC. So what we do is we layer together that requirements and guidance in the plan. And as I mentioned before, I'm talking about DMPonline, which is a service, as well as DMP Roadmap. Roadmap is an open source platform. It's the code base from which we run our service, DMPonline, but also many other data management planning services worldwide. So you may have heard of the DMP tool in the United States, or depending on where you're based in Europe, you may have heard of other services like Opidor in France or Tuli in Finland. And this is a kind of community managed code base. It's mainly run by the DCC and the California Digital Library, but we have had contributions from Canada and from France and from other countries. So it's something that we're working on collectively to try and improve the way that data management plans are written by researchers. So within the DMPonline tool and through this roadmap community, we've pulled together a number of guidelines and content which kind of helps drive the way the tool works. We've looked at the different expectations around data management planning and come up with a general checklist which explains the main things that are usually covered within a DMP. So aspects on data collection, for example, or the documentation and metadata or data sharing. And from that, we've developed a number of themes that are used within the tool. And this is the way that we essentially tag the different requirements and guidance and map those together so we can layer on relevant content depending on where you're from or the community that you're based in. And these themes have also been used as an input for a working group that I'll speak at the end of the presentation about machine-actionable DMPs and how we're trying to improve the way in which data management planning tools work. So I wanted to run you through a few features within the tool and then talk about some of our broader plans for the future. So the way in which the tool works is really quite simple. It asks a number of questions at the start to define what set of requirements and guidance you should be presented with. So we ask about where you're based and what research funder you're applying to. And then that means we can layer the relevant guidance together. And you can also configure that guidance as you go through and develop your plan. So you'll obviously get guidance from your own organization, but you can search for guidance from other institutes too, potentially from your different research partners or from other groups, depending on the kind of support that you're looking for. And you can turn this on and off as you write your plan, depending on whether you need more support. So when you come to write your plan, this is the kind of interface you'll see. You can see on the right-hand side here, I think you can see with the cursor, we have a kind of guidance panel where you'll get guidance from your funder or your institution or other sources like the DCC. And there are a number of example answers within the tool as well to try and help you respond. Because one of the issues we've found with a lot of the funder requirements is that they ask very broad questions. So often there's something like, you know, what data will you create? And it doesn't give you much of a steer. So you've often got quite a kind of free form response. And one of the things we're doing to try and help overcome that is to pull in more registries or catalogues to try and help guide the response as well as the different examples. And this will help us make recommendations as well. So one thing we've done so far, we were working with the Research Data Alliance. They have a metadata standards directory. So we've pulled that in where there are metadata questions so that you can then select, you can browse that catalogue for relevant standards to use and select those rather than, you know, if you're not aware of what options are available, that helps then direct your responses. And there are various other catalogues we could use, like Re3 Data about different repositories, or the Fair Sharing database, which covers standards and the different databases. And we're also looking at integrations with people like OpenAir. They've got an API with details about the different Horizon 2020 awards. So we can pull in information about different grants so that you can then select your project and pre-populate the basic metadata rather than having to fill in the details about the PI and the award information. We did a survey last year with OpenAir and and the European Commission to look at Horizon 2020 DMPs and how people were responding to those. And one of the questions we asked was about what people would like to see from tools and support. And you can see here the different priorities. So people were looking for recommendations on the standards. So that's why we've done things like the integration with the metadata standards catalog, or more examples and suggested answers, or drop downs, more kind of disciplinary tailoring. So these are the directions we're wanting to take with the tool, to try and provide more kind of suggested content, so that it's not so many free text boxes. You can also share plans within the tool, so you can share with your collaborators if you're wanting to edit your plan together. And we've also set a number of visibility settings. So when you first develop a plan that's private to you, but you can also share it within your organization, or you can make it public if you're wanting to share the plan with others. And one of the new features is getting feedback from people within your organization. So you can request support from either the librarian or the data stewards within your organization, who can then give you feedback on your plan and help you to develop that. In terms of plan publishing, in that European Commission survey, just short of half of the people said they would openly publish their DMP, and we're seeing a growing trend towards this. So we're enabling that through the tool, but there are many other venues where you can publish your plans too, either depositing in repositories or using journals like the Rio journal. And when the plans are made public, it obviously enables you to do more with that content. So we're able to help people discover the data more easily, and learn about data that is coming in the pipeline, or share information with other sources. We've also improved some of the administrator controls on the tool, so the people who are providing that guidance and support, we've made the workflows for customizing the tool easier for them, so they can layer on their content better. We've given that plan review option. We've also enabled them to get access to the different content within the plans, and to start to monitor the usage of the tool, so to get statistics on that too. And then the final thing I wanted to touch on before handing over to Rob is the kind of directions we're taking, and the plans around developing more machine-actionable DMPs. And there, what we're trying to do is move away from the kind of static documents and all of the free text to exchanging data across different research systems, pulling more content into data management plans, but also using the content within your plan to help inform other providers, so to help inform data services so they can plan their resources and allocate storage, or to support institutions to provide data services more effectively, or to help funders monitor the data management plans so they can see that data have been deposited as they were planned to be. And we've done some initial requirements gathering around this work, and off the back of that, we've set up a working group in the Research Data Alliance around developing common standards for data management plans. And their aim is to develop a common data model to enable that information exchange between different systems. And they've started to map out the different workflows as well. So when you're developing your plan, you're specifying the size and the type of the data, and how we can use that information to share that with different infrastructure providers to generate costings and to allocate storage, and later down the line, when you're depositing data, to start to apply licenses to your data as well, and to draw that information in automatically. So that's the direction we're moving in with the tool. Once the data model emerges from this group, that's something we'll implement in the roadmap platform. So if you want to find out more, we've done a kind of survey around all the work that's going on around data management planning services, and we're collating that in this active DMP site. And obviously there's the roadmap code base that can be used, and the different services like DMPonline if you're wanting to use a tool like that. So I'll hand you over to Rob. I'll just open this panel again so I can stop my screen share and start his. There we go. So that should be you now as presenter, Rob.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much, Sarah. So Let's continue this. After Sarah's presentation of DMPonline, I'd like to present to you what we call the Data Stewardship Wizard and how it can be used to enrich your data management plans. After this part of the presentation, you will know how to get all the possible benefits from your own research, from your own future data management planning. Okay. Let me first explain why I'm using the term data stewardship when a lot of others are talking about data management. What we have found is that a lot of researchers associate the term data management with tasks that we perform during a research project. And data stewardship is the term we use because it brings across much more that the data should be long-lived, much longer than the project itself. Of course, good data stewardship requires good data management during the project and also good planning even before that. So why are we actually doing data management? Well, Sarah showed you a list of very good reasons to do data management. But in practice, also as indicated by Sarah, many of us see data management and certainly data management planning as an obligation by the funder and in some cases an obligation of our own institutes. So why? Well, our funders are forcing us to make sure that the money they invest in data collection and processing is well spent. And often this means that we have to aim for data that can be reused by others when we are done with it. And our institutes are forcing us to be accountable. Research must be provable and reproducible. At first sight, both of these are a burden to our research, and the demands placed by reusability are even larger than for reproducibility. However, I've colored the word reusable here in two different colors for a good reason. Reusability implies usability. And as I can argue, the first reuser of our research data are we ourselves. Actually, we are the first reuser of our own data 3 times. First, when tomorrow we continue the work where we leave it today. Second, when a reviewer of one of our papers asks us to clarify how we obtained the result or suggests a slightly different set of parameters for an analysis. And the third time we are the reuser of our own data is when our current postdoc leaves the lab and we have to explain the state of the project to his or her successor. And if we say that we are the first reuser of our own data, then making the data reusable, as our funders are asking, is no longer just a burden. It actually helps the project itself. And as you will see a little later, this has been one of the prime ideas that drove the development of the Data Stewardship Wizard. So if reusability is our aim, how do we get there? Well, we get there through FAIR. Sarah, last week, mentioned the FAIR principles in her webinar in this series. The FAIR principles are principles that were worked out in a Lawrence meeting in Leiden in the Netherlands in 2014 and published in 2016. And since they have been embraced by many international organizations, including Horizon 2020, but also the G20. They are considered the way forward for dealing with growing amounts of research data. FAIR is an abbreviation of the 4 goals to make the research data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, both for humans and computers. You can see FAIR as a ladder with 4 steps, where attention to each of the steps is needed to reach the highest level of reusability. We reach the goal of reusable research data by making our data findable, accessible, interoperable, and then reusable. I don't want to go into the details now, but in the paper on the FAIR principles, 15 global principles were described that should be followed to reach FAIR data. How to do this is encoded in the Data Stewardship Wizard. So by following the Data Stewardship Wizard, you will be doing FAIR data stewardship. Now, FAIR data stewardship can of course be done with DMPonline, and I'm showing that here as well. We've been working with the Dutch funder SonMW on template for DMPonline that is largely based on making data FAIR. And you can easily see that the chapters 3 to 6 are the 4 letters of FAIR. However, there are 2 bumps in the road if you want to use only DMPonline as your tool. And the first bump in the road is that the templates in DMPonline are based on the things that both our funders and institutes are requiring from us, mostly. And not necessarily to help us ourselves to make the best use of our data and use the best practices and standards in our projects that help us the most. Sarah showed this screen in her part earlier too. To limit what is seen as a burden, everybody has been trying to keep the templates as compact as possible, limiting the number of questions that is asked. And from the templates that I've seen, the template that comes closest to my ideal of helping us researchers with our research is the template that comes up when you specify neither a funder nor an institute. That's the template that was made by the Digital Curation Center itself. So that's the first burden. The second bump in the road is the fact that many of the templates, and this was mentioned as well by Sarah, such as this question from the Horizon 2020 template, have open questions and guiding, very general guidance, giving only some general hints on what we should be included in the text. These kind of open questions raise lots of issues in which researchers ask, okay, but what would a good approach be here? Sarah already alluded to how they're trying to solve this problem in DMPonline. Another question that researchers often ask is, would I be able to copy a good data management plan from somewhere else? Rather than just answers, even copying a whole data management plan. I think that defies the purpose of a dedicated planning for each project. To properly fill a data management plan, very broad expertise is needed, from departments providing services in your institute, like the library and the IT, and also from field experts. Not all the data-related expertise may be in your existing network. Some institutes try to solve that by making lists of all the data-related services that are provided somewhere on their intranet. However, such a list does not help. Why not? Well, because the services that would make the most difference to the successful execution of your project are the ones that you don't know you need. You can only search a list for services you know that you may need. And the question text in this Horizon 2020 template is trying to guide you there by telling you what you may need, but unfortunately, all projects are referred to the same needs, and not all projects are the same. So if you still think that a list is a useful way to find out what you need, I'm very interested. How did you select which apps you use on, for instance, your smartphone? I'm sure the most valuable services of your phone were not ones that you picked from a list, but that you heard about from somewhere else, someone else, on how useful they were to them. And also, likely you are doing things with your smartphone now that would not have been that you would not have been looking for if someone else would not have told you that it existed. So back to data management, you need the expertise of others, and you need to be able to find the right expertise. Now, it is irritant if you don't know where to find that expertise. So a list could help there. It would be painful if you don't know it exists, and then already you probably wouldn't look in a list. But it can be outright dangerous for your project success if you don't know that you need a certain service, that you will run into a problem if you don't apply it. Good data management planning is working along with the guidance from experts to find good practice and services that are applicable to your specific project. Good data management planning is not reached by copying good data management plans. The value is not actually in the data management plan you produce, but in the process of data management planning. And as you can see from this citation of Eisenhower on the value of planning, in this specific property, scientific research is similar to warfare. Now, I will finally get to my point. To help us with excellent data stewardship, we need a whole army of experts in many different aspects of dealing with data. Many institutes are assembling such group of experts in a data expertise desk. But since we do not all have the complete set of experts available to us all the time, it would be nice to have a tool that harbors as much as possible of their expertise and references to even more information. Such a tool could be called an expert system. And this is what we've been trying to build with the Data Stewardship Wizard. So how was this Data Stewardship Wizard started? Well, since the end of 2013, I've been collecting information from experts in data management. I've been reading papers, visiting conferences and meetings, and interviewing people. And all the experience that I've been able to gather is collected in a mind map that is shown here in this column in 0.2 point print. For your reading convenience, I've zoomed into a random piece of the mind map that you don't even need to read, where you can see some of the questions that I've assembled. In total, roughly 300 of those questions are now coded in the Data Stewardship Wizard. And like in the mind map, the questions are presented in a hierarchy. This means for you that only those questions that are relevant to your project are opened on the screen. As I've said, one of the fundamental ideas of going through these questions for a project is that you cannot know everything that is relevant by yourself. The questions are therefore strongly guided, and there are almost no open questions which would be harder to fill. Also, there are references to experts and external materials in several places. Experts can be for the IT department or the library, but they can also be other researchers. They're specialized in other branches of science that you may need in a project with interdisciplinary data. In most cases, local guidance and local experts can be even more helpful, and this is why the wizard is also made such that it can be customized for your institute. We are currently working with the first institutes to do this customization. Now, I will show you a few snapshots of the wizard to show you some of the most important features. Here you see the wizard open on some of the first questions. On the left, you can see that the questions are split into 7 chapters. The chapters are loosely based on the phases of a data-intensive research project. Sometimes this is called the data lifecycle. The guidance plays a central role in the wizard and therefore is shown in line, just after each question. Every question has a little marker at the end, where you can give us feedback on the question, the guidance, or the answers. You can also use that to alert us of other relevant questions that should be inserted there. If you are an expert, probably expertise gained by your own experience, then you can use that feature to help us. By collecting and processing the feedback, we can continuously improve the wizard. Very important also are the indicators that you see after some of the yes answers in this screen. They indicate that more questions will open if that answer is collected. This is the hierarchy I told about earlier. In this screenshot, we can see that the question that opened before, because the first yes was selected, again has a yes that has this feature and can open more questions. And if you check the wizard a few months after this webinar, you will also find other markers next to the questions and answers that indicate how each answer will change the fairness of your data, or whether an answer is considered good data management practice. Some of the answers, when you should select them, they give you instant advice. You can see that here in blue. Often these can be things you should keep in mind for other parts of the planning. Many of the questions have external references. What you will frequently encounter are links to a book on data stewardship that came out recently by Barend Mons. The publisher has agreed that we can show this guidance belonging to the questions on the wizard. The number of links to external web pages and trainings is still limited at the moment, but the current project in ELIXIR is collecting information on existing training materials on data management. That will make it possible for us to add many more such references. Another feature that we think is very helpful is the fact that some questions can be repeated multiple times. For instance, to answer some basic questions about 2 different data sources, different experimental techniques, or different data standards that you will use. The wizard simply allows you to add more blocks like the one shown here for each relevant data format. Also, briefly want to show you the management interface of the wizard. This allows the complete customization of the questions, for instance, to add domain-specific questions or add references to local experts. The software, as well as the standard questions, are available under an open source license, and everybody is welcome to run their own copy. You may have recognized that we have 3 groups of people in mind that can make use of this wizard. First and foremost are the researchers. Researchers, such as most of us, can use the wizard to make the most value of the data processed in a project and to minimize the risk of mishaps. Further, we target the global experts and service providers and as well as experts in the institutes working with a localized version of the wizard. They can make sure that their expertise can be found by the researchers that need it. This is in strong contrast to simply being mentioned in a list somewhere. And the third group, we think that experienced data stewards will be able to use the wizard as a checklist tool, making sure that no important things are forgotten for a new research project. Just like pilots, as people that are experienced to fly a plane, use checklists before every flight. I'd like to finish off this presentation by expressing my thanks to all the experts that have helped us to assemble the wizard knowledge model, either via a public presentation or via a personal interview. I'd also like to thank my colleagues from ELIXIR in the Czech Republic, who have done all the software development for the wizard and who are my sparring partners. I'd like to thank ELIXIR for bringing all the expertise and experts in Europe together in one research infrastructure, and for helping us also financially to get the use of the wizard off the ground. And I'd like to thank EBI for giving me the opportunity to present this to you today. We will be organizing 3 workshops around the wizard until the end of 2018. At ECCB in Athens, there will be a workshop for researchers to try it out. At NetApp in Genoa, we will organize a workshop for mostly data experts and institutional data stewards on customization. And later this year in Prague, we will be organizing our own developer workshop. I invite everyone to try out the wizard at the address listed on this slide. And if you have feedback, any feedback on features or questions, please contact us. The wizard was made such that researchers can make use of each other's experience with data, and we really need your feedback to realize this goal. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to Melissa.
Thanks very much, Rob and Sarah. I think these 2 tools are going to be very useful for researchers, even just getting started and then getting you thinking about the different parts that you need to put into your data plan and to manage your data over time. So we have time for questions now. If you do have a question, please do type it into the chat box. You can see that there are a couple there already. Sarah, I know you've been answering some of them, but I'm going to read them out just for the sake of completeness.
Yeah, of course.
The first question was, is the tool from the DMP Roadmap, can that be installed and used locally?
Yes, yeah. So Roadmap is an open source code base. It's based on Ruby on Rails. And you can get that on GitHub through the URL I shared. And that's what we do at DCC. It's what the DMP tool team do, and the other instances I mentioned, like Opidor. So you can take it, you can install your own instance. We do ask if people are going to make extensions to the code that they contribute those back as well. So we have a Slack channel for developers to discuss ideas. So by all means do that. So you can customize the tool that way, or you can use a service like DMPonline if you're just wanting to use the admin interface and not host it yourself.
And what's the best way for people to find out about how they can install it for themselves? Would that be through GitHub?
Yes, yeah, we've got developer guidelines there on how you can install the code base.
Okay, thank you. So the second question, let me just find it, is for both of you, and is in your experience, is it only those who are using and designing DMPs, are they the ones that have to do it, or is everybody starting to do it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think often researchers first come to this because there's a requirement. I think that's usually the inroad. But actually in that survey that I mentioned that we did about Horizon 2020, a lot of people reflected that they did actually find the process useful. So they'd come into it thinking this is an administrative burden, but then they'd found that actually as they reflected on the discussion in the group about what data to create and how to do it and how they were going to share the data, where they'd store it so they could all have access, they found that they actually got a much better plan together as a project, and that it really benefited their research. So I think often you may first come into it through requirements, but I think people do see the value as well. And increasingly, I think new researchers, so PhD students, are being encouraged to develop plans, and then that has much more of a direct benefit because that's central to their PhD to have their data well managed, and it's a direct benefit to them. So it's a little bit of both, but I think often driven by requirements. I don't know if you've had a different experience, Rob.
No, I have the same experience. People come to us and see it as a burden, but once we really get started, we can convince them that this is really, really useful. What we've seen over the last, well, say 15 years, is that data becomes so pervasive in these projects, especially in the life sciences, that it becomes necessary to plan. If an aspect of your project is only a few percent of the effort, then if you do it wrong, you just do it again, and you can play with it until you get it right. But now that it's something like 25% or sometimes even more than 50% of a project that is dealing with data, it really pays off to do the planning well and run less risk of failure. Make sure that you think of all the aspects that you need to think of before getting started, and people do see that once they've tried it once.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I've said to people that we've had on our training courses here is that your data is a bit like a precious sample. If you had a really precious RNA sample that was from some obscure source, you would really look after it and pay attention to what you were going to do with it. I really think that data is like that now as well. You need to think about what you're going to do with it and where it's going to go. It's part of your experimental planning now, really. One more question. So is there a DMP tool which links to data directly? For example, to Zenodo or to internal data repositories?
So currently I don't think so, but that's kind of part of the future planning that we have, that we want to connect up more directly with repositories and to exchange information between, so that your DMP is automatically updated, with the persistent identifier and links to the data. Or if you publish your DMP itself and get a DOI for that, again, you can link between the different outputs, between the data management plan and the data that are underlying that, and other details like the ORCID profile of the investigators.
So from me, I can add to that. Actually, in the presentation, Sarah said that a data management plan is something that you start maybe before you start your project, but you keep updating it during your project. And in my work together with the Dutch funder ZonMW, we are also working on implementing in the data management plan some of the key things that they actually want to use to verify that everything is done. And among those will definitely be the DOIs of the final data that has been deposited to Zenodo or any other data repository.
I guess on the kind of converse there as well is, if you have quite a lot of your metadata already in DMPonline or similar, you can then use that to populate the forms and things that you have to fill in when you're submitting your data to a repository. So it should save you a little bit of time there, I think.
Yeah, that's actually something that the French group, the Opidor group, are experimenting with at the moment. They're wanting to add essentially a dataset profile, so you can record your datasets within the plan and then use that later on to facilitate the data deposit.
Okay. Any more questions this afternoon? Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I just want to take this opportunity to thank Sarah and Rob for presenting today's webinar, and to thank you all for joining us as well. We have one more webinar in this series coming up next week, which will be a sort of summary webinar of the series, and it'll be along the lines of myths and best practice for data management. So do sign up for that, and I might see you next week. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks and goodbye.